Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today for this webinar as part of the University of Birmingham's month-long program and celebration for International Women's Day. Today's title is Bridging Gaps, Gender and Race in Academia. I'm Dr. Sammy Lee, Assistant Director of Student Affairs for Postgraduate and EDI, and I'm delighted to welcome you all to this webinar. Here we gather to accelerate action towards gender equality, a theme that resonates deeply with the mission of International Women's Day. This year, we are honored to have Professor Donna Chambers and Maria Motunrayo Adebisi with us to exchange dialogues about the intersections of gender and race in academia. It's particularly a personal pleasure to welcome Professor Chambers of Northumbria University because Donna and I crossed paths at the University of Surrey some years ago. Donna is an interdisciplinary scholar whose work span cultural and heritage tourism, gender intersectionality, post-colonialism, and decolonization. Her contributions to academia and her advocacy for equity, justice, anti-racism, and anti-discrimination are truly inspiring. Maria Motunrayo Adebisi is a current postgraduate researcher at the University of Birmingham. She is also part of the first cohort of the 125th anniversary scholarships for Black British researchers. Maria Motunrayo graduated from the University of Oxford in 2017 with a degree in English literature. She is a published author of 2 children's books, Koku Kakambi. Maria Motunrayo her doctoral research reflects her commitment to connecting art and community through the University African Collection. Also, we are currently recruiting the next cohort of the 125th anniversary scholarship for Black British researchers. Google the information and find out more from our university website. Donna and Maria Motunrayo will explore both institutional and individual barriers faced by minority ethnic women throughout the postgraduate research journey. Donna will also share insights from her work with Generation Delta, aimed at addressing these inequalities and fostering a long-term increase in the number of Black, Asians, and minority ethnic female professors. Before we begin, I would like to set the context for today's discussion. International Women's Day is a global celebration for the social, economic, cultural, and political achievement of women. It has also marked a call to action for accelerating gender parity. So please welcome Professor Donna Chambers and Maria Motunrayo Adebisi for an engaging and insightful discussion. Please be reminded that you can also submit your questions to Donna and Maria Motunrayo via the Q&A function. And I will see everyone again for Q&As at 1:45. Over to you, both of our speakers.
Thank you, Sammy.
Yeah, thank you. That was a great introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Maria Motunrayo, and I'm a first-year PhD student doing African art at the University of Birmingham. I've kind of had a very interesting journey into academia, as have you as well, which is why it's great that we're having this conversation. Prior to arriving at the University of Birmingham, I actually worked in tech for a number of years as an operations manager for 2 popular dating apps. And I also have published 2 children's books that are based on Nigerian mythology, the Koku Akambi series. And something that I thought was incredibly interesting about you, Donna, is that you started your career in Jamaica's Ministry of Tourism. So how did that experience influence your academic journey?
Thank you so much for that. And it's so lovely to be here today. And yeah, my academic journey, I was working at the ministry responsible for tourism in Jamaica. I think I was there for about 4 or 5 years. And I just was always interested in tourism, but I never had a degree in tourism because my degrees prior to that were in international relations. So while I went to work in tourism, I never studied tourism. So I wanted to study tourism as a phenomenon. Not so much, I wasn't really interested so much in the business aspects of tourism. I was more interested in the social and cultural aspects of tourism. So I wanted to study tourism. So that then led me into doing a master's degree in tourism, which that was what brought me to the UK in the first place to do that master's degree in tourism, the University of Surrey. And that is where Sammy, as he mentioned before, that's where I met Sammy while I was at Surrey. Or I think it was when I was teaching at Surrey, I met Sammy actually. It wasn't when I was doing my degree there. It was when I was teaching there some years later. Yeah.
Hey, that's interesting. Very small world. I'm always interested in how, like, I don't know, people intersect and connect and find their way back to each other. But what I find fascinating is when you're doing something practically, such as actually working in the tourism industry and then studying it. As you said, you were more interested in the cultural aspects as a phenomenon. Were there any aspects of your practice when you're working in it that specifically influenced your academic journey? Did it, for example, influence the type of research that you wanted to do, the type of people maybe that you wanted to study? Yeah, I'd love to know a bit more about that.
Yeah, so actually when I was working in tourism, I was working in the public sector of tourism. But we also, so the government is also responsible in a sense for those, what we call quasi-governmental organizations, such as the Tourist Board, which was responsible for marketing of Jamaican tourism. And then you had this other sort of quasi-governmental organization called the Tourism Product Development Company, which was responsible for the product development of tourism. So I was in the government, which was the public sector. And when I was, so you kind of had an oversight of the different aspects of the tourism industry in Jamaica and in the Caribbean as well. And I was really interested because I came from a background in international relations. So I was very interested in the politics of tourism, in the sense of who had power, you know, in tourism, where did the power lie? And also, how did people, you know, in the sense of where the part, most of the tourists who came to Jamaica were from what we would call America, the West, right? Because most of Jamaica's tourists were from the United States, from North America, most of the United States, some Canada, and some Europe. So obviously most of them were white, and most of the people serving them were, of course, Black Jamaicans. So I was interested in that dynamic. I was interested in the post-colonial experience, and I was interested just in issues of power. So when I came to study in the UK to do my master's, those were the things that concerned me when I was doing my dissertation. I did my master's dissertation here, and I was interested in how public policy affected tourism development, because Jamaica had some socialist years and Jamaica had its capitalist years. So I was comparing how tourism developed under socialism and how tourism developed under capitalism. It was very different. So that was my master's dissertation. Then when I went on to do my PhD, I was then interested in looking at the UK, looking at England as a nation and looking at how the English nation was represented in promotional materials about England. What was it saying about the English nation and what was included in that concept of Englishness and what was excluded, but looking at that through the lens of the promotional material. So I was interested in the silences, bringing on my kind of post-colonial slant on that, coming from the Caribbean. I wanted to see where was the, you know, sort of colonial heritage represented there in these notions of Englishness. So that was where my PhD was. So the tourism was there running through all of that studying, but from, as I said, not necessarily from a management perspective, but more from a sort of cultural heritage and power, issues of power within that.
That is so interesting. Yeah, we're definitely going to circle back to issues of power and nationality and things like that, because that is very, very relevant. But circling back to what you mentioned about, you know, you and Sammy meeting at the University of Surrey initially, you have worked at several universities, including Surrey, also Sunderland, and now Northumbria. So what have been the most defining moments in your careers so far at those universities?
Oh, I think each of them had something.
Okay, well, you can say one defining moment at each of those places, if that's easier.
Yeah, okay. So the first place I worked was actually in Edinburgh. I was at Edinburgh Napier University. That's the first university I worked at when I finished my PhD. It was quite a big thing for me. Never been to Scotland. It's not the first time I go to work at universities at places that I've never been to. So I moved to Scotland, to Edinburgh, which was a big thing for me because I had never been there, and people were saying, what are you doing in Scotland? There are no Black people there. That's what they were telling me at the time. This was from 2003 now, so it's quite a while ago. I think there are many more Black people there now than when I was there in 2003. But people were saying to me, what are you doing up there? No Black, because I'm coming now. I did my PhD near London, which is quite diverse, right? So people were saying to me, what are you going into Scotland? You're gonna be lonely, there's no Black people there, all that sort of thing. Which was not a lie when I went there. There were not that many Black people. And when I say Black, I mean people from Africa, Caribbean. There were not that many there. So I think that was a big issue for me when I went to Edinburgh, and sort of navigating that, sort of being like the only perhaps Black person from the Caribbean there. And so that was one thing. And then I moved from there, and that's when I went back to Surrey, this time as a lecturer, not as a student. And I found the culture there quite different from Edinburgh, Napier. It was much more competitive environment where people were driven by metrics in terms of publications, grants, all this sort of thing. And I think I found it really challenging to be in that sort of competitive environment, where I thought that for me, the things that I valued weren't necessarily the things that were valued there at the time when I was there. So I think that was a defining moment for me when I realized that I needed to be somewhere that shared some of the values that I shared, and I felt that I wasn't getting that when I was at Surrey. So I left. And then I came up north again, never been up here. They said the same thing to me. There are no Black people up here, up north. And so I went to Sunderland, which I didn't even know where Sunderland was on the map, I have to say this. So I said, yeah, let me come up here, see what it's all about. And I thought that, their values were a little bit more akin to mine. So I decided to stay on at Sunderland. That was the longest spell that I've had in academia so far. And I think I was able to do quite a lot at Sunderland. And then after, so for me, that was quite a defining moment as well, because I think I had more scope. And that was because, I suppose, because when I went to Sunderland, I went there in a promoted position. So I think having that sort of more promoted position gave me more scope to do more of the things that I was really interested in doing. So I think for me, that was quite a defining moment for me to feel that I had so much more scope to do things. And then I'm now at Northumbria. I haven't been there long enough yet, I think, to have a defining moment. So I will let you know about that one. Maybe I'll a couple of years.
Wow, that is incredible. And there's been so much movement. I mean, I can definitely relate to people kind of your community being cautious about your career moves and kind of it, especially when it hasn't been done before. And sort of being like, oh, do Black people kind of go there? Like, I remember I went on a work trip, one of the apps I was working at. We went on a work trip to Russia. It was a couple of years ago. And I remember my friends just being like, what are you doing in Russia? Like, you should not be going there. They don't like Black people there. And of course, my first experience at university, I went to Oxford University, and I come from London. I always come from a very diverse part of London. All of London is very multicultural. So I was very shocked. I felt very out of place. It was difficult. It definitely was difficult for me. And when I went on my whole writing journey, I took a long time before I came back to academia, because I knew, having experienced Oxford and having experienced that, I guess, elite academic background, I suppose, I knew that it was associated with a lack of diversity, right? So I had a number of years where I really thought long and hard. When I was younger, I always knew I wanted to do a postgraduate, even before I did the undergraduate, which is very ridiculous. But I'd always thought it was something I would do. And people always told me it's something I should pursue because I really love learning. But I thought about it for a very long time because I thought I don't want to repeat of my experiences. And for me, there needs to be a level of diversity for me to feel comfortable. And it's not just other Black people, but other people of color, and an environment where you're not expected to speak on behalf of all people of color, and you can just actually do the thing that you enjoy doing, right? So for you, I know that you were the first and only Black professor at Sunderland University. So what was that experience like?
Yeah, I think it was really interesting. Because you were just talking about not being the one to speak for all Black people,
Yeah.
and but when you're the only one there, you have to, right? You just don't have a choice, really, but to do that. And I always feel a sort of responsibility to do that as well. But I just wanted to kind of come back to something. I think it's really important to have diversity, racial diversity, ethnic diversity, gender diversity. I think all those things to me are the first step, right?
Yeah.
It's really important to have that diversity. But over and above that as well, I think it's really important to have people who are thinking in particular ways, because you can have a lot more Black people somewhere and they're not thinking in this anti-racist way of thinking. And not all Black people want to get involved, or people of color, not all of them want to get involved in things that are going to, uplift, that are going to value, anti-racism and so on. So I think that diversity is really important and you must have that. But in addition to that, the diversity must be thinking in a particular way and must have certain values in order to bring change, because and I know that there are many Black people or people of color out there that embrace whiteness, right, as a way of being and a way of thinking. So I think we really need to have both if we're going to have change. So for me, being the only Black person, it was really quite a big responsibility. But I think that it's also gave me the opportunity to try to put in some kind of change in the institution. But it's always better to have more, right? So we're not the only one. So, it's kind of like when they talk about Black women being both invisible and hypervisible at the same time. Yeah. So, you're the only one. So you're very, very much visible, hyper visible. But at the same time, you still have to make a big effort to be heard. And, for that, to be heard and to be visible. So I think that is the kind of paradox sometimes of having particularly African and Caribbean women in particular spaces in higher education, because of that paradox of being both hypervisible and invisible, which can be quite, create a lot of stress and tension, I think.
Yeah. There was, I mean, I really did like what you said. And even for me, I'm trying to, on the one hand, of course, value diversity and representation, and also recognize the levels of that, because I think sometimes people obviously look at representation as, okay, we need a couple of faces of people of color, but they don't think about class, they don't think about how that intersects, they don't think about neurodiversity, they don't think about having differently abled people. And it could be very alienating because I grew up from a very Black working class background. And again, back to my Oxford experience, there were Black people in the ACS, and I felt out of place because a lot of those people came from very middle and upper middle class backgrounds. So they didn't really understand the working class experience. So that meant that that was another level, that was just another thing. And even the way that it operates as a university is just not very welcoming to working class people in a lot of ways, or like the activities that are seen as normal are very expensive. And, when you're a working class person, you normally have to work as well as going to university. And that's just not something you were even allowed to do there. So just a lack of understanding of that experience really shaped kind of how I felt. And you're right, it's about having people who are anti-racist in their thinking. And what would you, because I think anti-racism is a term, especially post-2020, as we all know, same with decolonial, which is a term that I grapple with. It's a term that I need for my research, which is a decolonial project on African art. But at the same time, I feel frustrated with, because it can be used to disguise the fact that people don't really want to change, but they want to be seen as enacting change rather than doing it. So what does anti-racist thinking, what could you name like 3 tenets of what anti-racist thinking really means in an academic practice? Like an academic.
So, you've been talking about quite a sort of performative culture, right? Where people perform and, they feel that, well, we're doing something because we're performing. Yeah, look over there, we've put more Black people up there. What are you still complaining about, right? We have no more, Black people in the society and in particular positions. So we have arrived, our work is done, right? So I think that we need to be careful about that, and we need to be probing what are the structural issues that still remain, because you can have more, which is what I was alluding to before, you can have more people of color in particular positions, but that is where you have to be careful about that performative stuff because the structures haven't changed. So for me, being anti-racist, anti-racism is about actually understanding, first of all, the structural issues that mitigate against people of color, right? You have to understand those structural issues. I'm going to talk about all the colonial things that come from colonialism and so on. I think you really need to educate yourself about those structural issues. The second thing is around doing something and not just talking about it, right? Actually doing something within organizations that are going to make some sustained and sustainable change. You need to see the change within the organization and not just putting, I think it was, sorry, I've forgotten the name, it's gone out of my head now. It's not just about adding women and stirring, right? It's not just about adding, people of color and stirring when the whole structure remains the same. So you have to actively be doing something and not just saying, I'm against racism. It's not about, oh yeah, well, I'm not racist because I have a Black friend, that kind of discussion. It's about actively doing something that is going to contribute to some kind of change. So I think we do need to be activists, actually, if we're anti-racist. I think inherently being anti-racist means that you are an activist. And I don't mean activist in the sense of not everybody is going to be going out on the street and carrying placards. That's not what I mean by being an activist. I think you have to be doing something, some action, or kind of advocating for your organization to be doing something actively that is meaningful, and that is going to contribute to some kind of sustainable change. So for me, I think all of those things, this understanding the structural issues that lead to racism within organizations and being active in terms of what you're doing to bring about that change within organizations. And also, I think it's about being a bit sort of understanding that this is a process, right? It's not, you talk about decolonization. It's not going to be, boom, this is done, right? I mean, we had over 400 and odd years of enslavement on top of the consequences of enslavement, whether culturally, economically, politically, socially, that has happened for many, many years since. So in order to decolonize, I think we have to understand that it is, and I think it is a process, right? That even though you might have those moments when there are big changes that have happened in the decolonial process, right? For example, we've been talking about George Floyd in 2020 and the resurgence of Black Lives Matter. So there are these particular moments, I think, that happen in the United States. The civil rights movement was a huge moment. So there are these moments that happen that are quite significant along the journey, but we're still talking about it now. We're still talking about decolonization now, which just shows you that it is this process and we can't stop because of these particular moments that happen. We have to recognize that these are moments, but there's still work to be done, and not think because this happened, our work is done. Right? So that was the third thing I would say, understand that it's a process and we need to keep alert to the fact that this has happened, yes, but our work is not done.
Yeah, I really like, because I'm going to bring it back to the Black women who may be considering a career in academia, including myself. And I think when you talk about the fact that we need to be activists in academia and we need people who, yes, we need more people of color for sure, but we definitely also need people who are anti-racist and are committed to deconstructing white supremacy. And that's everyone. Everyone should be on the same page with that. And it brings me back to what you said about responsibility, like as being one of the only Black people in your university, you had a huge responsibility. So how would you suggest that people who are also in that same position care for themselves or look after themselves? Because it sounds like a lot of pressure. I think part of that you answered already by sharing that burden with, I guess, allies, people who are committed to real activist work and not just performative speech. But are there any other methods that we could use and take away from that, from your experience?
Yeah, so I'm going to say two things to begin with. I think you have to have self-care. You know, you have to care for yourself as well. I wasn't doing a lot of that at the beginning, you know, I wasn't caring for myself as much as I should have been. And that's really important, that you need to be alert to your own signs of stress. And so I think you really need to take care of yourself, right? So self-care to me is really important in that, right? Recognize in yourself when you're doing too much, when you start feeling the stresses, when things starting to get out of control. You need to be able to recognize those and take a little step back and take a little bit of a break, I think, from that, so you can regenerate and come back again. Because I think this kind of manic working, it's kind of a diminishing marginal utility, as they would say in economics, right? It's like you're just not going to get anything out of yourself if you're too tired, you're too burned out. So it's about taking those breaks that you need to take to regenerate. So self-care to me is really important. But I didn't learn that initially. I learned that at my peril, right? That I needed to do more in terms of self-care. The other important thing, I think, is having networks, having supportive networks, whether it's your family, whether it is friends, whether it's other colleagues who share similar values as you. I think having networks, I cannot stress enough how important that is, to have those networks. You know, you need to have people that are going to listen to you when you're moaning, you know, who are going to lift you up and support you, and just get rid of the negative people out of your life, really. You don't need those, right? So you need people who are going to be supportive and critical, yes, but not in a nasty way, right?
Yeah.
Because you don't want people that are just going to say, yeah, you're right all the time. But, you know, you need to have those critical friends and people that are going to support you in what you're doing. So I think for me, that was the way that I managed to, you know, sort of cope through those situations.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I've definitely taken away a lot from that. I think something that is great about University of Birmingham is, one, with this scholarship kind of group, you come in a cohort. So the one that I'm on in particular, we have a group of us that are all doing different PhDs, which I think is important. I mean, it's something I've taken throughout my kind of academic career. I really enjoy making friends with people and connecting with people that don't do my discipline. Because I think sometimes you really just get into the nitty-gritty of what you're doing, you get a bit lost, but then you exercise that ability to briefly explain what you're doing to someone who has no clue about that. I think it really helps you refine your ideas, and you can relax, because it's like anything you say it probably sounds quite smart to someone who's just not in your discipline at all, you know. Like when all my like STEM kind of friends tell me what they're doing, even though they feel terrible about it, I'm like, wow, sounds amazing. STEM cells, that's great. It's great. You're a genius, you're amazing, and vice versa. And then you also mentioned one of my favorite topics in the world, which is yeah, networking. And then that led me to the idea of mentorship, which I know you're very, very passionate about, and as am I. So actually in my writing career, I have an amazing mentor, Jane Robinson, who's a feminist historian. And I met her through my alumni network at the University of Oxford, and she's been giving me life coaching / mentoring / coaching me through these breakdowns I often have about my books this whole time. And it's been amazing because I was one of those people that could never finish a story. I'd always have an idea, and then I'd make a little bit of progress and then just give up. But something about someone talking to you and encouraging you, someone who's already done it, someone who's there and you can look up to them, especially as women, you know, we still suffer from imposter syndrome, and just having someone who believes that you're not completely crazy, you are onto something good, seeing them regularly really, really helps. So I've definitely enjoyed that a lot creatively, and I've had a lot of success from that. And now I'm going down this academic path, definitely curious about what having an academic mentor would look like. So how did mentorship and career advice impact your career?
It didn't.
Oh.
I didn't have any mentors when I didn't have any mentors when I was coming up in academia, you know, not any one-to-one mentor. I had a great supervisor, actually. I just like to put a plug in for my supervisor who was doing my PhD. Great throughout my PhD journey, but it wasn't really career mentorship in that sense. It was more about me getting through my PhD work and that sort of thing. So I didn't have any career mentor. I didn't have any career coach, nothing like that. I had no kind of support like that throughout my PhD journey. So I just wanted to put in a plug for the Generation Delta project that we're doing, actually. And Sammy mentioned it in his introduction that I am one of the members of the Generation Delta project, that we received funding from the Office for Students and Research England to do a project for 4 years that is aimed at enhancing the experiences of racially minoritized women in terms of postgraduate research study. And that project, we have been doing a number of workshops with racially minoritized women, and we do mentorship programs for them as well. And what I think is one of the great things, you were talking about your network there, where you are now at Birmingham. And one of the great things that we found with these workshops that we've been doing for Generation Delta, and the workshops are around access, what we call access to the academy, it's around retention and progression, and it's around training for careers. And it's all for, we're the only project that is focused on women who are racially minoritized. And whenever we have those workshops, honestly, the sort of feedback that we get from the women that attend our workshops, they're just so happy to be in a space where they see others that look like them. They see all of us who are working on the project are all racially minoritized women professors ourselves. So when they come into the space and they see us as professors and they see other racially minoritized women in that space, they just feel so joyous and happy, and just the vibe in the workshop. That just goes to show how important it is to have those spaces and to have those networks where people feel joy, you know. And for me, joy is really important as well. It's not just always talking about the oppression and, you know, the negative things. It's also about celebrating the joy that you get when you engage with that kind of network. So I'm really proud of the Generation Delta project, which you should come on. You're a PhD student at Birmingham. Welcome to come on.
I'm joining. I'm 100%
one of our workshops.
I definitely will be signing up to that. Sounds absolutely incredible. And I am sorry that you didn't receive that support at the beginning of your career, and now have like turned it around to support other women such as myself in our careers now. And if you could go back and give your younger self career advice as a mentor, what would it be?
Yeah, I would say that it's important. I know that people talk about, I think it's important to have a goal, to be honest. I think it's really important to know where you want to be and also how you're going to get there, you know, get some advice. Because one of the things that actually comes out in some of the Generation Delta workshops that we've had with students is that they don't feel that they have this cultural capital, you know, this understanding of the ropes and understanding of what they need to do in order to succeed in an academic career. how do they get into an academic career? If, how do they succeed in an academic career? So they don't know the sort of the roadmap. They don't have the cultural knowledge, because many people probably come from families that haven't been to university, or they don't mix in the circles, right, of people that are regularly going to university and going into academia. So a lot of the times we don't know the ropes. It's not a lack of confidence. It's about not really understanding how do you get there, and you don't have that cultural capital. So if I was to go back into my career, I didn't have any roadmap. I was just kind of, I would say that I came into academia by accident as well. I didn't plan to come into academia. So I think that it would be really important if I'd had a goal, and if I'd had that kind of mentorship support, somebody who knew the ropes, who was able to advise me, support, guide. I think that that is something that I would really have appreciated when I was coming up in academia, and when I was doing my PhD as well. My PhD was awful. I didn't enjoy it at all. I enjoyed my subject area, but not the journey, because it was quite a lonely journey. I didn't have, those kinds of support and mentoring and that sort of thing. So this is why I think mentoring and having support and a community is so important to get through your PhD, and also when you're in academia as well, particularly as racially minoritized women.
Yeah, I mean, you mentioned joy a couple of times, and that is something that I am incredibly passionate about. That's why I write books for children, teenagers, because I think often when we're having conversations about diversity and why it's needed, we're talking, as you said, we're using the big O word, we're talking about oppression, discrimination. We're not talking about the joys and the beauty that comes from diversity, that comes from drawing from different traditions and worldviews. I know that it's incredibly enriching to do that. Something I've enjoyed growing up in a really multicultural area, and learning about different cultures and growing up among them. And it's something that I know that the children I talk to when I do events at schools really enjoy. And it's so funny because my editing team, they were all like, the children, they're not going to understand all these Yoruba gods. They're going to be so confused. And I went to a school in Cheltenham literally the other day, and they were like, Shango, oh yeah, they were saying Oshun. They like picked it up within minutes. And they were just so like clued onto it because it was brought to them in a really exciting way. And it was brought to them in a really joyful way, and not as an add-on, not as like another burden, not in a way that you're telling people off and you're being pedantic. So yeah, I'm going to try my best to have a joyful PhD experience and lean on that mentorship and sign up to Generation Delta, because it sounds incredible. And you've obviously had an incredible career advocating for equity, justice, and anti-racism. What legacy do you hope to leave behind?
Oh, if I can just help one person, I'd be really happy. I just want to, make sure that I'm as supportive as possible to people, because I want people to, especially women, because that's my focus, right? Particularly racially minoritized women. I just see so many powerful, beautiful women, and I just want to make sure that I'm supportive of these women in terms of their careers. So if I can even help one woman, I'd be really happy to do that, and yeah, I'm just so happy to be given the opportunity to help others. And I firmly believe that we should not pull the ladder up behind us, right? I think that this is why we're here. This is why we're on this earth, is to help others and to support others, right? Because we couldn't be doing what we're doing now without those that came before. I'm very much into this kind of really belief in the ancestors and how they have made the path for us. So I want to be one of those ancestors that makes the path for other women from racially minoritized backgrounds.
That is really beautiful. Yeah, that's definitely something that I am deeply invested in as well. So yeah, it's a really, really beautiful way to think about it. And finally, are there any exciting projects or initiatives that you're working on or research that you'd like to share?
So I'm continuing Generation Delta ends in January 2026. Our funding comes to an end, so we really need to think about how we keep the legacy going. So that's something that we need to be thinking about. Yeah, I'm working with my research group that I co-founded at Northumbria called Marginalities. It's a group for racial justice in arts and design, and I just want to keep going with projects that we're doing with that group. Yeah, and just continue to do my research in terms of, the sort of intersection between gender and race within sort of cultural heritage spaces and leisure spaces as well. So I'm really interested to carry on that work and to do more active work as well. I do stuff in the community as well, and I'm very interested in continuing to do that work, in community spaces as well as in academia.
That was incredible. Definitely something I'm very invested in as well. We shall talk further. Okay, I think it's about time for the Q&A. Am I right, Sammy?
Yeah, so thank you very much, Donna and Maria Motunrayo. We have some questions from our audience. Actually, they're for both of you. So the first question we have is, how can Black early career researchers build networks and community with more established senior academics from racially minoritized background? But also in reverse, in your opinion, how can more established racially minoritized academic provide support to early career researchers as well, in particular in humanities and other subject area where we are far and few between?
Yeah, so shall I go first on this
Go first, go ahead.
Yeah, so I'm always an advocate of people going to conferences and going to seminars, even if it's not in your area of research, because you learn so much. That was one way that I met quite a few people going to, and sometimes you see some random things coming around, right? Some seminars and things, and you look at them and say, well, this isn't in my direct PhD area, so I'm not going. But I always feel that if you have an interest in something, it doesn't matter if it's in your particular PhD area. I think it's always good to go out to conferences and seminars and really see what's going on and speak to people. I think speak with people there, because you will see people there that sometimes just some random conversations happen and things come out of those random conversations, because that's happened to me a lot, right? Just going out there, making sure that you go to things, I think is really important. So much is always happening at our universities. I think go to seminars, go to these sessions, and just, this is where you'll see the other academics, right? The noted academics, the other academics, you'll see them there. And I think that's a way to sort of network. Look out for things that are happening at the university. For example, I just spoke about Generation Delta, where the notices will go out to the university. Look for those things. There are other networks as well that have been formed. For example, coming out of Northumbria, there's this SHINE network that is for women academics from racially minoritized backgrounds. So there's this network that has been formed that helps, where women help to support each other that are in academia. So I think it's about looking out for those spaces where you can get involved and network. So sometimes you need to look for them. They're not going to come to you necessarily. So I think you need to be more open to look for those spaces, even if it's not something that is directly related to your work. You can learn a lot from that. And that's what I would, of course, I've forgotten the other half of the question now.
Well, the second half will be for Maria Motunrayo. From your point of view, how we can have be more effective among more established racially minoritized academics to provide support and a little bit of partnership working with the next generation of academics?
I think that's something that requires institutional change. As Donna mentioned, different universities have different things that are important to them, different values. So if that's something that the university itself values and incentivizes those academics, because obviously they're quite busy people, but if that's something that they're going to be incentivized for, I think it would then benefit them to reach out and provide more of their time. But in terms of my own personal advice, you just have to be really nosy. You just have to, when you see people either on social media, you see them out and about, it's about presenting yourself to them. It's about sending them an email. I've emailed, I'm not going to let you know how many professors or writers, and I've just sent an email off into the ether introducing myself, and we'll see. I'll see if Kinde Andrews gets back to me. I don't know. But the thing is, like, like you have to see yourself as having a global network. And it's surprising actually how many people will just respond to you being really keen. You've read something of theirs and you've sent them an email saying that you really enjoyed it, you'd like to chat. You'd be surprised at how people get back to you, especially if you stalk them on social media. We're a lot more connected now, and it is just about having that confidence. But from an institutional perspective, it needs to be incentivized by the university and it needs to be a value. I know the University of Birmingham is advocating for public engagement at the moment. We can see how that's changed the way that people are approaching their research. So if they did the same thing with mentorship, we'd probably see that change as well.
So thank you. We also have another question. So I think it's quite interesting for both of you as well. Both of you are fantastic speakers. And thank you for that for today. Just want to highlight that for sure. You're also asked, in addition to your day-to-day work, to be presenting and talk about this topic about academia as a Black woman. So it is extra things that you are asked to do, the extra task. How do you feel about this in terms of being asked to do this extra work? And what can university do in terms of getting better? Maria, do you want to talk about it? And then we'll pass it on to Donna.
I mean, from my perspective, it depends on what the extra work is, if I'm being honest. So I really, really like talking, so I don't mind. I enjoy having conversations. I do get the benefit of being connected with the lovely Donna, as opposed to having to send an email that she might ignore. This is brilliant. Obviously, there is the obvious thing about, valuing people's time by obviously paying for their time. That is important. That's definitely something that encourages people to do things that are additional to their regular tasks. Obviously, it suggests that you value them and you appreciate them. But also, as someone who's just started their PhD quite early on, it's very useful to have this connection, so you have that network. So I guess it depends on what the work is and whether that individual person considers it as labor or not. For me, talking to someone is a nice thing to do, although it's not like writing an extra paper. It's not like an extra an exam or anything. It's actually quite lovely, but it depends on the person. If I was like more shy, that might feel like a huge burden and a really daunting task.
Yeah, I mean, just to follow up on what Maria Motunrayo said just now, it's sometimes I don't see it as work because I enjoy doing it. But at the same time, I'm really one of those persons who feels that, particularly if you don't have a permanent job, it's really important to compensate people for their time, okay? Particularly for self-employed people that are on the 0-hour contracts that we're trying to get rid of, all of those, I think it's really important that people are compensated for their time. So I think that's a way to really, help people who want to do this, because it would be extra work, because if you're working by the hour and you're doing something, then you're not getting paid for that. So I think that that's really important. The other thing that I think is important is going back to the sort of institutional level. I think it's really important that institutions value the work that people are doing that are outside of their normal academic jobs. And, when we look at promotions criteria, for example, sometimes those things aren't valued because at universities, they're talking about how much money did you bring in? What size of grant did you bring in? How many, publications did you have in 4-star journals? And a lot of the work actually that racially minoritized women are doing, they're the ones doing the EDI work. They're the ones doing the admin work, right? And then they're not valued in terms of their work, in terms of the academic promotion system, right? So I think universities really need to think about how they value the work that is actually done primarily by women that are racially minoritized, or even just racially minoritized people in general, right? We need to have a rethink about our value system within universities. And I think that that's really important. That would encourage people to do this extra work that you mentioned, when they see that there is value in doing that work.
Thank you. We also have a question from white British female academic colleagues. She asked about being a white female academic. Of course, racism is less obvious to her. She wants to be an ally. She also wants to contribute and change things. but she's also conscious about not to getting into a space that is for racially minoritized colleagues to get together. How can she be a helpful ally to talk about tackling racism and to be supportive for other racially minoritized female academics as a white British academic?
Yeah, so I have a lot of white British allies. I have to because there are not many of us in the academia. So it's a necessity to have white allies, of course, and they're valued very much. We value white allies, of course. And I think that one of the things is that for me is sort of understanding, and I said that before when I was talking about anti-racism. I think it's about understanding what this is about, understanding the underpinning, issues that are there in terms of racism. And that allows you to have the language and the conversations that you can have with those from racially minoritized backgrounds. Because I think some people want to be allies as a performative thing and don't really understand the underpinning. And then they come into spaces and they don't understand the language, they don't understand how to act in those spaces. And I think it's really important that that knowledge and understanding is garnered for those who want to be allies so that you can then go into spaces. And you need to sort of value the spaces. If it's something just for, like Black Staff Network, for example, you need to value that space, right? And if you're invited in, that's fine. But don't feel that if it's a space for Black academics, it's not going to be your space. That's how I see it. But if you're invited in, I think that's fine for me. And I think we have to have allies. It's essential to the sort of activist work that we're doing because we can't do it alone. There are not many of us, so we need that. Yeah, that's what I would say.
Great. And also for Maria Motunrayo. One of the participants asked about as a mother with a child, she wants to understand what builds your interest and how your roots and cultural background shape your interest as a development. She wants to get some tips from you in order to support her 6-year-old daughter in terms of valuing her roots in her development for the years to come.
Yeah, that's what's so lovely that you've got a 6-year-old daughter. 6-year-olds are so cute. It's one of my favorite ages because they ask so many hilarious questions. As for me, I was born and grew up in the UK. I have 2 Nigerian parents. They're Yoruba. I'm very proud of their heritage and their roots. And how I learned to be more proud of it, I think. But when I was growing up, a lot of my sources of inspiration were things like Roman and Greek myths. There were all the books, all the Victorian novels that I kind of read and that were pushed to me as like classics. And then it was through learning about my own mythology. So the Orisha mythology is what I draw on for my novels. And then learning about my own history that I learned that there are really incredible things that I had to be proud of that I could draw inspiration from and not just rely on Western models of thinking to kind of create my own inspiration. So I'm not a parent, so I can't give any specific advice, but I think learning about your own specific culture and teaching that to your child and buying her books and showing her media that represents her is definitely an amazing way to go. And if it's possible to travel to either your country of origin or a Black majority country is also something that is really important. I can remember as a child being taken to Nigeria and just seeing that, because the way that it's presented, like Africa is presented, I knew it was false. As a kid, you see these adverts with like children with extended bellies and like carrying water on their head and all this kind of stuff. Then you actually go there and you're just like, that is not the reality at all. And I knew that because I'd seen the truth, right? So being able to have access to that experience is incredible. But these days, there's lots of media about that. There's loads of documentaries, even social media, loads of social media channels where they show African history and contemporary history. So yeah, it'll be fine.
I think Maria Motunrayo, you are being a bit modest here. I think you should plug your books a bit more here.
Oh,
Children's books.
yeah. Oh, plug. Buy the books everywhere.
Buy the books.
Buy the books.
One
Yeah.
final question, really want to ask me, it's a great question, rest of time. One of our first year PGLs at the university asked about, both of you doing fantastic work, but also how to navigate the label being called as the colonial researchers. Out of the work that you do, how do kind of that identity or some kind of label being given upon you due to the work that you are doing to change the academia?
Wow, this is something I fight with all the time. I mean, it's really, really, really difficult because on the one hand, you don't want to invent terminology that people are just have no reference for. So therefore, it makes no sense outside of yourself, and then it would be truly self-serving. On the other hand, sometimes there's an amazing essay, which I'm sure you're familiar with from what you've written, called Decolonization is Not a Metaphor, which is about how academia enjoys using that term to just neutralize these really important conversations and to assuage like white guilt instead of doing any real work. So it's something I struggle with, but I think you can write that into your work. So even I'm starting the very beginning, the introduction to my thesis, the very, very beginning, by the way, and I talk about how the term makes me uncomfortable. And I talk about my positionality as a Yoruba woman who's born in the UK, who also has Nigerian parents. And that's something you can discuss. And I try my best to incorporate Yoruba terms when I can. And I also believe in, not translating when I don't want to. And that's something you can do. So yeah, you can talk about your frustration. I think centering your positionality is the best way to do it. And you can definitely discuss why the term is problematic while still understanding that you may need to use it now and then. But I completely understand how you feel. I really don't like it. I really don't like it. But sometimes I am forced to use it just so people know what I'm saying. Donna, how do you feel about the term?
Decolonization. So I know about the Yang, sorry, is it Yang and Wang
Yeah.
that spoke about needing to decolonization.
Yeah.
So decolonization needs to be decolonized itself. I have to say I still use decolonize as a term, but still recognizing the critiques of the term. And I'm interdisciplinary, so I cross over into a number of different critical theories as well. But I still use the term. I still see some value in the term decolonization, because I think when you say that, it's important to sort of locate what you're talking about, because I think people kind of understand in a sense what that means, but at the same time, that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be critical of the term itself. So it's the same, like and maybe over time we'll find a different term rather than decolonization. Words change, language changes, language doesn't stay static. So I think that at the moment I still use it, but at the same time I'm critical of the term, as Maria Motunrayo just mentioned.
So thank you very much, both of you. Really fascinating conversations, and for your time, and for participants who want to find more about 125th anniversary scholarship, Maria Motunrayo's books, or Donna's Generation Delta. I'm sure on Google's it is always quite. You can find the information in the top search result. Thank you very much, and please make sure take a look of the rest of our International Women's Day program. There's lots of events going on until the end of the month, and have a great rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.